Let's begin this new week, with what could be a pivotal day in the war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that is now 3.5 years old.
That's right. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to meet this afternoon with President Trump at the White House. Zelenskyy is traveling to Washington alongside several European leaders who will join him for today's meeting. This comes after President Trump's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That was at a military base in Alaska back on Friday. Well, it ended without a ceasefire deal, and it did not have Zelenskyy in attendance. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy visited the EU headquarters yesterday in Brussels ahead of today's meeting with President Trump. He spoke about the importance of having the support of fellow leaders.
It's crucial that Europe is as united now as it was at the very beginning, as it was in 2022, when the full-scale war began. This unity really helps to reach real peace, and it must stay strong.
We will have reaction ahead of today's White House meeting when we check in with Kira Rudik, a member of the Ukrainian parliament. But we're going to begin with NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor joining us with the very latest. Yamiche, good morning. So President Trump's sit down with leaders today comes as he's intensified his efforts in recent weeks to put an end to this war in Ukraine. Walk us through what we can expect today and who's going to be taking part in these crucial meetings.
Well, good morning. What we're going to see today really is an all-out effort by Ukraine and the leaders of Europe, many of them that are coming here in person to the White House, to really try to stress that Ukraine needs to be part of any sort of negotiation to bring an end to the war in Ukraine, and that Russia essentially can't be trusted. The people that we're going to see today is really, I think, sort of an example of who is trying to back Ukraine in this moment. So, of course, you have the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but then you also have the leaders of Germany, France, Finland, Italy, and the UK, as well as the leaders of the European Union, which is known as the president of the European Commission, as well as the leader of NATO. So what you have here are countries that are actually would be putting boots on the ground if Ukraine were part of NATO. Of course, Ukraine is not part of NATO, but what you see is really this sort of all-out effort to stress that Ukraine isn't coming here alone. It's coming here backed by all of these European leaders. Now, remember, of course, back in February, there was that tumultuous meeting in the Oval Office between President Trump and President Zelenskyy, where President Zelenskyy essentially got put out of the White House. We remember it. There was so much chaos that day, and there was this really contention between President Trump and President Zelenskyy. President Zelenskyy is really trying to avoid that today. That being said, there is going to be a one-on-one meeting, from our understanding, between President Trump and President Zelenskyy. But then there's going to be a bigger meeting with all of the European leaders and President Zelenskyy and President Trump. So interesting to see what ends up coming out of this meeting. Ukraine certainly wants to see some security guarantees. Whether or not they get that is going to be a big question.
So, Yamiche, President Trump returned to Washington without securing a deal with Vladimir Putin last Friday. He didn't say much at that news conference, didn't even take questions, but since then we have learned a little more. So what were the key takeaways from that summit?
It's a good question, but it's just not clear. The president has said that it was a good meeting, and we've heard that maybe there were some security guarantees given to Ukraine, possibly a conversation about territory swapping. But what's clear is that there wasn't an actual deal made. That being said, take a listen to what President Trump said about the meeting.
But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there.
So again, not clear what was actually agreed to, but it is the fact that the meeting happened is something that, of course, European leaders in Ukraine are still concerned about.
Yes, we know President Trump, President Putin, they didn't take any questions from reporters during their summit, but Trump envoy Steve Witkoff, who took part in Friday's talks, told CNN over the weekend that Ukraine could be offered a security guarantee. How could that work?
Another good question, and it's very unclear how that could work. We know that Ukraine has been pushing to be part of NATO for years now. They have not yet been successful in that. They haven't been able to secure NATO membership, which would really secure them not only sort of actual moral help, but actual boots on the ground if they were to be invaded. That's part of being in NATO. If one country is attacked, others are supposed to actually physically help them defend themselves. That being said, security-like guarantees would mean, in theory, that they have the protection of some NATO members, whether that actually means boots on the ground, whether that means more military aid, whether that means aerial aid. We're not quite sure. But it is very interesting that this conversation is coming up, that essentially they could have semi-NATO leadership. What that actually looks like, I think it's going to be a big part of the discussions today. Joe, Savannah.
All right, Yamiche, thank you so much. Well, President Trump made a series of comments on social media ahead of this meeting with President Zelenskyy and the European leaders. In a post on Truth Social on Sunday, Mr. Trump said that Zelenskyy could, quote, end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Well, throughout all this, the people of Ukraine are holding out hope that peace could finally come to their country. NBC News Chief International Correspondent Richard Engel reports from Kharkiv.
President Zelenskyy said he still wants a ceasefire with Russia to stop the killing while a final deal is worked out.
Putin has many demands, but we do not know all of them. And if there are really as many as we heard, then it will take time to go through them all.
Zelenskyy spoke before heading back to Washington for the first time since February. And this time, he's got backup. Zelenskyy is clearly hoping to avoid the embarrassment of his last visit when he was overtalked and ultimately kicked out of the White House. But what's at stake for Ukraine goes far beyond protocol and pride. Russia occupies 20% of Ukraine, and President Putin has said all of that territory and more is his price for a deal. Ukrainians find that outrageous and believe that Putin should get nothing of what he's taken by force, and that Ukraine must have security guarantees from the West so that Russia won't invade again. Ivana Skiba is a journalist in Kharkiv.
What are you hoping will come out of this meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump?
My hope is that Western world or democratic world still exists, that we still have common values, common dignity. If we give up land, this war will continue.
As President Zelenskyy heads back to Washington, Ukrainians will be watching how he's received. Will he get a red carpet or another cold shoulder? And will President Trump pressure him to accept Putin's demands for land?
All right, Richard, thank you. For more, let's now bring in Kira Rudik, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, someone we've been speaking with in recent days. Good morning. Thanks for joining us again. President Zelenskyy, of course, visited the White House back in February, as Yamish mentioned, and the world witnessed that contentious meeting between him and President Trump. In fact, Trump told Zelenskyy that day he needed to be thankful that he didn't hold the cards when it came to the war. With that in mind, what are you looking for today? Is Ukraine willing to swap any land if it means ending the war, getting any security guarantees from the U.S., or is that just a non-starter?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. First, Ukraine needs to hear what are the security guarantees, what did President Trump mean, how it will work together, and what would be actually the practical meaning of the Western world protecting Ukraine. Ukraine does not trade its territory, and President Zelenskyy is not authorized to promise to give up any of the territories. We are a democratic state, and we go according to our constitution, where it is clearly says that for any territorial changes, there needs to be a ceasefire first, so martial law lifted. Then it can be a referendum where people can say if they want the territories to change. Right now, it doesn't seem that there is a political will or people's will to do any of that. So let's start discussing what did President Trump and dictator Putin agree to, what can be the security guarantees, and what can be practical steps to be taken to stop the killing. The issue that we are facing right now is that President Trump decided to change the idea of a ceasefire, and right away Putin has attacked our country with ballistic missiles and drones, killing today at least 7 people in Kharkiv, and including 2 of them children. So people who did not survive to witness the peace negotiations. So peace negotiations need to start after a ceasefire. So Russia would show by fact and not just by sweet words to President Trump that they're ready for the peace.
So, Kira, today these other European leaders, they'll be alongside Zelenskyy at the White House. How significant is that for this united front to be presented to President Trump?
It is significant on so many levels, starting from the public expression of the support to Ukraine, to Europe saying that Europe's security will not be decided or discussed without Europe themselves. And of course, we have seen that President Zelenskyy and President Trump's personal meetings may not go so well, so it will be good that they will be there all together. Also, President Zelenskyy will be standing on what Ukrainian people delegated him, that Ukraine is a sovereign nation that is not trading people, not trading territories, not trading its dignity. And we understand that that's probably not what President Trump wants to hear. So this will be a tough meeting where President Zelenskyy will be standing in between President Trump and the Nobel Peace Prize. But for us, it is critical that we move forward closer to the peace.
We spoke with you on Friday ahead of Vladimir Putin's meeting with President Trump in Alaska. You mentioned President Trump no longer pushing for a ceasefire in the wake of that summit, but also some questions about what they did agree to. I mean, what were your takeaways from that summit? Overall, did you feel it was a good thing or a negative thing?
We don't know just yet. We will see with the results of what will be discussed today, because perhaps there was a lot of things behind the closed doors, right? But from what we see right now, Putin has gotten escaping from sanctions. He has gotten no ceasefire. President Trump got to look Putin in the eye, and Ukraine got nothing. So it was not a positive summit for us. However, things may change today. From a personal note, this was the worst way to deal with the dictator and with the aggressor, to threaten something and not to go ahead with the threat. And this makes Russia laugh. This makes Russia feel that they have an upper hand. The fact that President Trump said that if there will be no ceasefire, will be sanctions, and then did not ahead with his threat.
Kira Rudik, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, closer to home, more National Guard troops are headed to the nation's capital this week, and now some of them will be armed. 3 Republican-led states, it's West Virginia, South Carolina, and Ohio. They're going to deploy hundreds of additional troops to Washington, D.C. at President Trump's request. 2 U.S. officials told NBC News some of those troops will begin carrying firearms as they conduct what the White House describes as a crackdown on crime. Over the weekend, people took to the streets in several cities to protest the deployment. Meanwhile, Democrats are pushing back on the narrative that D.C. is unsafe.
What's happening here in Washington, D.C. is just a stunt. Donald Trump didn't like the fact that the walls were closing in on him, that his own base was questioning why he wouldn't release the Epstein files, why he was protecting very powerful people. He didn't want to talk anymore about the fact that our healthcare system is about to collapse because of the cuts that they have made. He's just trying to distract from the stories he doesn't want Americans to be talking about.
NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach joins me with the latest. Gary, good to see you as always. So, D.C.'s police chief is back in charge of the Metropolitan Police Department there in D.C. This is after the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. She had temporarily installed the DEA administrator, Terry Cole, as emergency police commissioner. How did D.C. officials manage to retake control of the police, and what happened during that time?
So the Department of Justice on Friday realized they were about to get an unfavorable ruling from a judge, so they met with the D.C. Attorney General's office for more than 90 minutes at the courthouse on Friday, and they did come to that deal where Pamela Smith, who is the D.C. Chief of Police, gets to maintain control of the 3,100 members of her force. But in return, the Trump administration is now forcing Mayor Muriel Bowser to order the Metropolitan Police Department to participate in immigration enforcement operations. And that doesn't just mean the operations themselves as they are carried out, but it also means requests for information. Any information that the Trump administration wants from the police department, the police department now has to hand over. Previously, D.C. had been seen as a sanctuary city of sorts. That is no longer the case. Savannah?
Gary, let's talk about the arming of troops here and kind of the shift. What do you think that's going to do on the streets of D.C.? How different will that feel? And what is the plan for these additional troops coming from those few states I mentioned?
So this is a significant escalation. Previously, we were told they would not be armed. They would simply be helping with traffic control and acting as a deterrence of sorts in places like the White House and National Mall, Union Station, the big train station here in Washington. That is no longer the case. Some of them will be armed, and now they are doubling the numbers of people that are going to be in here. We're talking 1,500 National Guard across the city. And just to talk about how incongruent all of this is, these National Guard members, some of them will be armed. None of them will be able to make arrests. Savannah?
Gary, the White House, though, is touting over 300 arrests since this operation began. That was back on August 7th. Tell us what we know about that and how long we think this will last.
So they have made 300 arrests. These are federal agents, people from across the federal government that have been put out onto the streets of D.C. More than 300 arrests, more than 1,800 people involved in making those 300 arrests over the past week. And this can only happen for 30 days. That's as long as President Trump has this emergency power. If he wants to go one day longer, he's going to have to get congressional approval for that. And that's something that seems unlikely at this point. Savannah?
All right. Gary, thank you very much.
New questions are swirling around a violent confrontation captured on camera over the weekend in Southern California. It involved masked federal agents who allegedly opened fire after stopping a car in Los Angeles. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has the details, and we do want to warn you, some of the video is disturbing.
A tense confrontation with federal agents in Southern California has left open questions about why the encounter ended with gunfire. Customs and Border Protection agents say they were conducting a targeted operation before a traffic stop in San Bernardino. As masked men, including one in a CBP hat, approached the car, an unmarked pickup truck is visible outside.
What do you want?
The agents asked the driver to open the window. But the driver says he won't open it. Seconds later, the agents shatter the driver's side glass.
Hey, you can't do that!
The driver hits the gas, followed by 3 loud pops, confirmed by Homeland Security as gunfire. In another angle, slowed down, you can see the agent's hand reaching through the broken window just as the truck speeds off. The video does not show how the family was stopped, and it isn't clear why they were pulled over. The Department of Homeland Security says the suspect drove his car at the officers and struck 2 CBP officers with his vehicle, forcing a CBP officer to discharge his firearm in self-defense. The driver, identified as Francisco, spoke to our station NBC4 Los Angeles at his home, saying he had to protect his life and family. Later, federal agents and local police showed up to the home, clashing with community members, but officials did not detain Francisco. NBC News law enforcement analyst Rob D'Amico.
I think maybe higher ups in the agency or a judge reviewed it and did not think that the evidence that those officers had were enough to get an arrest warrant. So I think that's really telling of the situation from the federal side.
Questions that have left a family and their community asking why.
Brother was okay, Pop was okay. I'm just glad we're okay. But it's not cool that ICE is able to do something like that.
Steve Patterson, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, this morning, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands are starting to reassess the damage caused by Hurricane Erin. The massive Category 4 storm lashed the islands with powerful waves and strong winds, downing trees, knocking out power. The storm also dumped several inches of rain in a short time, and it caused widespread flooding. Erin's the first hurricane of the 2025 Atlantic season, and it's now heading north. That is prompting officials in North Carolina to issue a state of emergency for the Outer Banks and also a mandatory evacuation order for Hatteras Island. For more on Erin's path, let's get you your morning news now. Weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is in this morning. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. And this is a massive storm in terms of strength, in terms of size. The best case scenario, though, we're kind of splitting the difference between Bermuda and also the U.S. I'll show you the track in just a minute. But right now, we're looking at a Category 4 storm. It was a Category 5 storm on Saturday and then kind of weakened a bit on Sunday. Back up to a Category 4 storm with winds at 130 miles per hour. It's moving to the northwest at 13 miles per hour. And we do expect to sustain that strength over the next day or so. By Wednesday, we're still looking at a major hurricane at Category 3 with winds at 120 miles per hour. And then it's going to enter some cooler waters. So we're looking at downgrading to a Category 2 storm and then eventually to a Category 1 storm. But take a look at this path. You can see that we are splitting the difference between the east coast of the U.S. and also Bermuda. The best case scenario, especially for a storm this size, still, though, we will see impacts along the east coast of the U.S. This is why we have coastal areas from Miami all the way to Eastport, so Florida all the way to Maine, where we're going to see really large swells, really rough surf, and also life-threatening rip currents. So I know it's the end of summer. We want to be at the beaches, but you want to heed all those warnings this week because we're looking at this impacting over the next several days. Also, Cape Hatteras could see some winds because this is a wide storm. We're looking at the tropical storm force winds extending about 400 miles. So you can see where that blue kind of clips portions of the Carolinas. We're going to watch that very closely over the next several days, but that would be in the Wednesday, Thursday timeframe. So we have a little time to watch that track over the next couple of days. Otherwise, we are looking at strong storms in portions of the northern plains. Could see some large hail, some winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, some locally heavy downpours. A nice day in the southwest. Really hot throughout the plains, the Mississippi Valley into the Midwest. We're looking at heat indices right around 105, 110 in spots, and showers and storms continuing in portions of the southeast. Again, any of these could be locally heavy. You could see some of that in the Carolinas too, and into portions of the Gulf Coast. So let's take a look at those heat alerts. We are looking at millions under heat alerts. Where we see the red, that's where we're looking at extreme heat warning. 53 million people impacted. Wow. So we're continuing the same stories. Things are not budging. We're looking at some stormy conditions in the southeast, also tracking Aaron and those heat alerts as well.
Storms and heat.
Yep, exactly.
The story of the summer. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Air Canada hopes to restart operations today after a dramatic weekend disrupting travel all around the world. The airline's flight attendants went on strike early Saturday over pay and scheduling disputes. Then the Canadian government stepped in, issuing an order to return to work. Well, yesterday, the union representing those 10,000 flight attendants refused that order, calling it, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. The airline now expects to restart operations tonight. So far, roughly 700 flights have been grounded today. That is stranding an estimated 100,000 travelers around the world daily.
Well, just 2 weeks into NFL preseason, there's already a spotlight on safety in the league after multiple alarming injuries. The most recent happened just over this weekend. It was when the Los Angeles Chargers quarterback took a hard hit and had to be carted off the field. NBC News correspondent Ryan Chandler has the details.
Down the right sideline, and well played by the LA secondary.
A frightening moment on the field. LA Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston taking a brutal hit while looking for a long ball in Saturday's preseason game against the LA Rams.
Took a big hit there.
Medical staff from both teams rushing to his aid.
Took a shot there, and that's just football for you.
His teammates kneeling in solidarity. Chargers head coach Jim Harbaugh giving some insight into Johnston's condition.
Quentin suffered a concussion. He was taken for more evaluation, but he was talking. He remembered the play, was moving good.
It's the latest terrifying moment in a preseason already leaving some players with serious injuries. Earlier this month, Detroit Lions safety Maurice Norris laying on the ground after taking a knee to the head.
Everyone's holding their breath.
He was rushed to the hospital after 20 long minutes on the field. He's still recovering.
When you have that type of high acceleration hit on the human body, there's going to be potential damage.
For a player like Johnston, when is it safe for them to get back on the field?
I suspect they're going to take it very, very carefully. Though I expect Johnston to be out for about 4 to 6 weeks.
The NFL working to make the game safer. Last year, the league unveiling a new line of helmets to protect players from violent hits, designed for their unique positions. Johnston's still recovering, as fans hope to see him back on the field soon. Ryan Chandler, NBC News.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.